Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video requested by JP Spectre and 7. It's called Elden Ring Lore, Queen Marika, and the Erdtree, made by SmoughTown. Yes, if you want to check out my previous reactions to other Elden Ring related video content, remember the playlist card is going to be at the top. Just click on it and be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as SmoughTown's YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. Okay, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hear me, demigods, my children beloved. Make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices.
Wait a minute, is this an ultimatum? Is she telling the demigods who they're like her children, right? Yes, they're her children. Is she telling them that she better become something in life, or they're going to be killed? Is that what she's saying? Okay, wow, tough parenting out here.
Erdtree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the Order, or divest thyself of it. To wallow at the fringes, a powerless upstart. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erdtree.
The lands between are a realm that is home to many a legendary and powerful figure, and as the Tarnished, we get to rub shoulders with these giants.
Rub shoulders? Don't you mean kill? Rub shoulders. That's kind. That's a kind thing to say.
Even if they have seen better days. Yet at the centre of it all is Queen Marika, the Eternal, the god of the world, and the vessel for the Elden Ring. For the mystery of the game starts with the opening cinematic that declares that Queen Marika is missing. It is she who ushered in the age of the Erdtree through bloodshed and battle, and symbolised an era of bounty under its boughs. Marika's hand is felt everywhere in the lands between, through her children, and through an entire culture that has been built around her image and God-given authority. Yet the grandeur of the Erdtree and the realm of Marika would not last forever, despite that being the intention. Marika's duty was an immense burden, and to understand Marika is to understand the incredible stress that she must have faced over hundreds, if not thousands of years. The flaws of the Golden Order and the machinations of others had chipped at the foundations of the world, and the final blow would be delivered by Marika herself. With a swing of her hammer, Marika destroyed herself and the Elden Ring, leaving the world crooked, broken, and without leadership. Yet despite these immutable facts, and spending hundreds of hours surrounded by her statues, Marika remains one of the most enigmatic characters in the entire game, and multiple questions will always remain. So join me this week as we examine the Erdtree and Marika, the god of an epoch. And I'm really excited to bring you this video, as I find both of these subjects some of the more difficult to comprehend in the entire game. And to that end, I've referenced the work of other great content creators throughout this video, such as Erdden, Ziostorm, Ashen Hollow, Quelaag, and Last Protagonist, the latter even being kind enough to provide me with some translations for certain pivotal items. I think for subjects like this, we are enriched by drawing upon each other's work, much like traditional scholarship, especially since the lore of Elden Ring encompasses such a large breadth of themes and ideas. So consider checking out these creators below, as they're all fantastic members of this community, and their views and perspectives on these subjects has helped round out my perception of this subject matter. And before we carry on guys, remember that if you enjoy Elden Ring lore, then please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I now have hours of lore content for you to dig into, and plenty more to come. I've decided to structure this video by first of all exploring the origins of the Erdtree, before then tying it together with a history and analysis of Marika in the latter part of the video. The origins of the Elden Ring's influence upon the world began with the coming of the Elden Beast, something we learn via the Elden Star's incantation, which reads as follows. It is said that long ago the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. The Elden Beast would then become the Elden Ring, and thus would begin the primordial age of the dragons, where the ancient dragons would rule on behalf of the Greater Will. The setup of this rule is very similar to what we see in Marika's era, a god and an Elden Lord.
Okay, that is interesting. So before the epoch, if I can say that, of Queen Marika and her demigod children, there was a previous, existence, a previous timeline where the dragons were ruling over the land, and they were the ones who had control over the Elden Ring. They had their, should I say, god like Marika, and they had their Elden Lord. Alright, interesting. And the god and the Elden Lord, are they not the same thing, or are they different institutions? Yeah, I just need to know that as well. Okay.
This is something we learn from the remembrance of the Dragon Lord, which shows that Placidusax was the Elden Lord to a god that we don't know much about. Indeed, we can even see what appears to be a more primordial version of the Elden Ring engraved in Far Missoula, the capital of the dragon civilization. And
I see, yes, it does look like the Elden Ring that we know of, in the game, if I can say that. It just has a different, strands on it. It looks a bit different, but yeah, the main structures, the circles, and that centerpiece is still there. Yeah, okay.
This engraving of the Elden Ring in a different form just reinforces what we really know already and what we'll explore in this video, that the Elden Ring's power has changed form over time. In the modern era, it is represented by the Erdtree, and the Erdtree of course has its origins in the Crucible. Now, whether this engraving of the Elden Ring found in Far Missoula is representative of the Crucible or of an earlier version of the Elden Ring is unknown, and not really that particularly relevant for this video. The main important takeaway is, of course, that the Elden Ring has changed over time. And now let us go back to the Crucible so we can understand the origins of the Erdtree. It is a basic piece of lore, but the Crucible is an earlier form of the Erdtree. I'm sure most people understand that by this stage in the game's history. But let's cover it anyway. So it's something we learn of via the Godskin Noble set, and it reads the following. Not unlike the Crucible, the Erdtree in its primordial form. This means that to understand the Erdtree, we must first of all look at the Crucible, as they are essentially two evolutionary stages of the same force.
Two evolutionary stages of the same force. Okay. So the Crucible is also a form of Erdtree, but it's just like a sapling tree. Is that what it is? And then it grows and develops into the Erdtree. Yeah, I think maybe that's what he means. Okay, wait. Let's just continue. Sorry.
The timeline in Elden Ring is not extremely clear, but I believe the era of the Crucible overlaps with both the prehistoric era of the dragons and the early era of the Erdtree. I think this idea can be supported by some imagery we find in Far Missoula, and shout out to Quailag who made this connection in one of her videos, and I will link the relevant video below. In Far Missoula, there are reliefs in certain parts of the area that have some interesting implications. These reliefs seem to show a tree flanked by two unusual looking creatures, who to me must either be some kind of dragonkin, or as Quailag suggests, misbegotten. As shown by the description of Siluria's spear, as well as the actual imagery of the weapon itself and her helmet, appears to depict the Crucible as a sort of wild and natural looking tree, and given the Crucible is the primordial form of the Erdtree, this makes perfect sense. The Crucible is distinctly linked to the Greater Will and the power of the Elden Ring, a period of red gold, rather than pale gold of the Erdtree and Golden Order. The idea of red gold being used as an indicator of the Crucible's influence is an idea that we can learn from the Gilded Great Shield, which reads the following: metal great shield coated with gold, carried by knights loyal to Godric. The red tinge in the gold coat mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erdtree, the colour of homeward yearning. The nature of this gold is interesting because the two different colours of gold tie it back to an allegiance with the Greater Will, but the different shading of red and pale symbolise two different eras of golden rule, a point well made by Ordovis's great sword, which reads the following: this sword is imbued with an ancient holy essence. Its red tint exemplifies the nature of primordial gold, said to be close in nature to life itself. The red tint of the gold seems to be symbolic of the themes of primeval life that we often see associated with the Crucible, hence why we see this gold adorning the Crucible Knight's armour and weapons. And thematically, the red gold ties in here with the idea of life being closely associated with the Age of the Crucible, something we will again examine when we come to the Age of Abundance chapter, an overlapping period between the Crucible era and the Erdtree era. The evolution from Crucible to Erdtree, from wild life to refined life, explains the differences between earlier Greater Will beliefs versus those of the Golden Order, and in turn leads us to understand why the Golden Order views the worship of the Crucible as a more primitive worship of life and the Greater Will. The item description of the Gilded Shield, of course, calls into question Godric's beliefs, given that it is a shield wielded by his soldiers, that he is linked to Godfrey, a lord more in tune with the Crucible, and he also venerates dragons, and the fact he blends together life in an artificial sense via grafting. But this of course is an analysis and a story for another video. As we already discussed, gold was a signifier of the Greater Will's power in this time, and while it was red gold, it is nonetheless kin to the paler gold of later eras and later Golden Order incantations. And indeed we learn of the kinship and ties between the red gold of ancient dragon lightning and the pale gold of modern Erdtree worship via the gravel stone seal, which reads as follows: the worship of the ancient dragons does not conflict with belief in the Erdtree. After all, this seal and lightning itself are both imbued with gold, creating a bridge between these more primeval eras and the age of the Erdtree. One is an evolution of the other. For all intents and purposes, they are both tools of the Greater Will.
Okay, alright. And I'm wondering about the Crucible and the Erdtree. I mean, was the Crucible planted somewhere else, in a different location from where the Erdtree is growing right now, or were they built, or should I say, were they planted in the same place? And did one replace the other, or is it that the Crucible evolved itself into the Erdtree? You know, like the Crucible was the golden red tree. I'm just trying to imagine what kind of color, how would it look like, you know? And then it transformed itself into that pale golden tree, the one that we see right now. Yeah, I just need to know about that. Okay.
The very fact ancient dragons wield the red gold in their lightning powers just reinforces that they were the chosen of the Greater Will at this earlier stage. And again, to me, it could imply that the Crucible may have existed in the time of the ancient dragons, although the timeline is not very clear. However, we do have to remember that the Crucible is a force where all life was once blended together. It is therefore possible that primeval life emerged from this churn, including the dragons. Very possible, though it is not without its problems, and it is something I will analyse in my upcoming Crucible video. The main point of understanding to take from this chapter is that the Elden Ring is the force which governs the rules of this world's domain, and has done so since the prehistoric era of the dragons, the age of the Crucible, and thus the Erdtree. These ages are all defined and linked by one single power, the power of the Elden Ring, and thus as we get into the Erdtree proper, we must understand that the Erdtree is just the latest extension of the Elden Ring, a way for the Greater Will to exert their power over the lands between, just as the Crucible before that. So time has always been tricky in Souls games. So how long ago are these past events? How long does the timeline stretch? While it isn't necessary to bog yourself down in these specifics, I do find it an interesting and rewarding idea to ponder.
Yeah, I actually do want to know. I actually do want to know, when did all of this begin, with the Elden Ring, being bestowed, or, the protectors of the ring would become the dragons. And I'm just wondering, is there any other species or any other civilization before the dragons that held custodianship over the Elden Ring? I also need to know about that. But yeah, it's quite interesting, really.
We've already seen that the empire of the ancient dragons is referred to as the prehistoric era. And just for reference, the term prehistoric is coming from the dragon shield talismans that you can find different varieties of. And that can give us some ideas in regards to timescales if we relate it to our real world as an allegorical comparison. For us, prehistory is the time of human history before humanity began writing, began documenting history. And that documentation can take any form from writing, inscriptions, paintings, or symbolism, any type of creative medium or tool meant to commemorate past events. And effectively, in our world, this is a huge period that starts about 3 million years ago, but only ended about 5,000 years ago. And so for me, the most reasonable view of this time span is to view the reign of the dragons as several millennia ago, probably even more. The Erdtree had not been born from the Crucible, its primordial form, and the dragons wielded the power of the Elden Ring, as we can see from their red gold lightning, and the fact that they had the Elden Lord and God of this era. Regardless, it is clear that this was a far different era of Elden Ring rule, with the form of the Elden Ring being far different from what we're used to in the modern era, quote unquote. Yet much like Marika's reign, the rule of the dragons would come to a close, and I do think it is within the scope of this video to at least touch upon this subject.
Was the end of the rule of the dragons due to their own mistakes, or was it done by the Greater Will? Where the higher management of those who, control the Elden Ring decided that, okay, we're done with the dragons, let's move over to humans. Let's give humans a chance with the Elden Ring. And I just need to know about that as well. And the Greater Will, is it not a god itself, I know people, in the game they say that Marika is the god, but I don't know. I think she's just a middleman, like a middle conduit, the one that is delegated orders by the Greater Will to do their bidding. Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say. But I'm just trying to say that, she is not really a god. She is just, the face of the Elden Ring. She's just a tool to be used, and then once her mission is complete, she'll be discarded away. And then just like with the dragons, they had their Elden Lord, they had their god, but then they were all cast aside. I'm not sure whether it was due to their own self-destructive natures probably, or it was by the Greater Will. But in the end, that god and that Elden Lord were cast aside, and humans came in to replace those spots. So that's why I'm just saying that maybe she is not really a god. Maybe the people, on the land, they see her as a god, but then in actual truth, she's just a custodian, someone who takes care of the Elden Ring until it is to be given to someone else. Yeah.
We know from Plesedusac's remembrance that the god of this era disappeared, and it is no doubt this that played a key factor in their society's collapse. And originally this chapter on the dragons was much more robust, but given the size of this video, as you will see, I really had to tone it down as there was a lot of bloat in this video, but suffice it to say I will cover the history of the dragons in a later video. But for whatever reason, the dragon god fled and Plesedusac would hide beyond time, and between that reign and Marika's reign, we don't know of any other Elden lords or any other gods in that period. And it is my belief that between these two reigns, there was a little bit of a power vacuum, which explains why we see a multitude of different civilizations clearly at different times having risen and fallen in...
Oh, I thought they were all, the same civilization. I thought the lands in between, were just covered with all of these human civilizations that all worshipped the goddess Marika, the Queen Marika. So yeah, okay. Didn't know it was different cultures.
This period. And with that said, we'll move on to the next chapter where we try and assess this pre-Erdtree era. As mentioned in the previous chapter, it's unclear whether the dragons ruled all the way up to the period known as the Age of the Erdtree, but my suspicion is that they fizzled out quite a bit before the emergence of the Erdtree, leaving a period without a god and Elden Lord, where the Crucible was the main force in the world. This is of course my speculation, but I base it off the fact there's plenty of evidence of plenty different communities arising in the years prior to the Erdtree's rule. I believe there's a good bit of carbon dating in Elden Ring if we look at certain events, and this is one that I've referenced before in my videos, and that is the War of the Ice Dragons and the Fire Giants, as explained by Borealis's Mist. And I believe this is a good bit of supporting evidence that there was a good length of time between the fall of the Age of the Dragons and the rise of the Age of the Erdtree. The reason I believe this is because the war was fought by the Ice Dragons, who are a species of what we know as modern dragons. We learn of the differences between modern and ancient dragons from items such as the Lightning Strike and Dragon Wound Grease. In short, modern dragons are the bipedal, more wyvern-like dragons like Agheel, Borealis and Smaragd.
Basically the ones that we see in Game of Thrones, right? Yeah, like Drogon, Viserion, Rhaegal, and all the other dragons from House of the Dragon. How they just have their, wings, their legs, and that's how they are. Alright.
These are dragons who have descended from the stone-like quadrupedic ancient dragons, and have lost their immortality due to the loss of the gravel stone scales. The fact that these derivative and modern species of dragons were the ones to war with the fire giants, who themselves would overlap with the early age of the Erdtree, is an interesting point of history for me. I see the modern dragons as a degenerate devolution that must have come about through the collapse of their empire and their association with the Elden Ring. This is my speculation, of course, but the very fact the fire giants were able to carve out their own territory and defeat an entire branch of dragonkind without any retaliation from the Elden Dragon Lord, to me simply suggests that the Dragon Empire was a thing long since past by this stage, and is a great indicator of a sort of timeline given we know that the fire giants would be at the zenith of their power at the...
Oh, sorry about that. Considering, how long it might take for these dragons to degenerate into the new forms that they are, it must have been many years before the advent of the Erdtree. So yeah, like it's a huge gap between the Crucible epoch and the Erdtree epoch. Yeah, it must be like a very long time.
Beginning of the age of the Erdtree. And I do think it makes sense given how long we are talking about. We are talking about moving from a primeval, prehistoric era of a world moving into an era that is more aligned with the medieval era, and I'm of course referring to the Leyndale civilization of the Erdtree. And to me, there are clear indicators that there have been many other early civilizations that have risen and fallen within the timeline, and they would only really fit in the gap between the Age of the Dragons and the gap between the Age of the Erdtree. We of course have the ancient civilization who built the Ul and Uld palaces, and the mausoleum that would then become the Mogwin Palace. Given the architectural similarities to real-world Sumerian and ancient Greek civilizations, the implication of these architectural choices and influence to me is meant to imply that this is a civilization well in the past before the rise of Leyndale, which again reflects a more modern medieval era. And this is not to mention the fact that it is actually referred to as an ancient civilization in the Mogwin Palace map. Again, we have had two different terminologies used for different time periods: the prehistoric Age of the Dragons and the ancient era of the Uld and Ul palaces. However you look at the timeline, it becomes undeniable that there were cultures that grew up and developed separate from the influence of the Erdtree. As such, they developed their own ideas, practices, and worshipped their own gods, and conceived their beliefs outside what we know to be as the norm during the reign of Marika. A good example of this idea is rooted in an actual bit of in-game lore and not my own waffle, and this is found in the Sorcery Explosive Ghost Flame item description, which reads as follows: "In the time when there was no Erdtree, death was burned in Ghost Flame. Deathbirds were the keeper of that flame." So the Deathbirds and the Twin Bird deserve their own video and analysis, of course, but they and their associated beliefs are a great illustration of a world without an Erdtree, when death was completely divorced from it. And building upon this, for a further example of a community and culture that has clearly developed their own beliefs and practices surrounding death, we can of course look to the ancestral follower community. This culture has a wholly different burial and funerary practice, free from the dominion and domination of the Erdtree. Indeed, these are more than just beliefs, as their beliefs on death and rebirth are made manifest in the form of their ancestor spirits. The remembrance of the regal ancestor reads as follows: "Ancestral spirits exist as a phenomenon beyond the purview of the Erdtree. Life sprouts from death as it does from birth. Such is the way of the living." Indeed, even in the corpses of these ancestral beings that we find in the areas of the ancestral followers, we can see new life forming from their remains. Flora budding in a perfect display of the cycle of life and death, a cycle that is free from the Erdtree burial of Marika's era. And I think we have hit here on an important point, as we now understand why the arrival of the Erdtree was not welcomed with open arms. These are practices of death and life that have nothing to do with the Erdtree and are completely separate by it, and the Erdtree would be a threat to that way of life. And with that understanding, let us look at the protection of the Erdtree incantation, which reads the following: "In the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order."
Wow. Okay, no, this is surprising, really. I thought, I thought the Erdtree was, a welcome gift to all the beings on the land. I never really thought that there would be people who don't, follow this religion, who don't adhere to its expectations of what people should do during life and what they should do with the dead. But yeah, between the epochs of the Crucible and the Erdtree, there were cultures that were springing up. They had their own ways of doing things. And now that the Erdtree is here, it dislodges, it upends their types of cultural practices and how they deal with the dead. And yes, I guess you could say Marika was a tyrant in some sort of way. She was a conqueror. She conquered the land. She made sure that everybody adheres to the Erdtree's way of doing things, and all these other types of cultures and religious practices that have been swept away, to make way for the hegemony of the Erdtree. Oh, okay. So Queen Marika is not, this nice lady who just lost her children and she just went mad. No, she's been fighting. She's been a fighter for a very long time. Okay.
Everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, and now we can start to understand why. Entire societies, communities, and cultures had risen up with their own practices, gods, religion, and their own ways of understanding death. So the arrival of the Erdtree would be a massive tyrannical force in respect of your own beliefs and practices. Instead of being allowed to burn your dead in ghost flames, or bury them, or honour your ancestral spirits, Erdtree burial would replace that and be seen as the only true way of honouring death.
This is a burial? Oh gosh. Are they being absorbed by the roots? Okay. Nasty business.
Erdtree burial, which is essentially becoming one with the Great Tree, being absorbed by its roots in a horrible convergence of life and rebirth that would remove any reverence or individuality from the burial process.
But where is the rebirth in that? You're being absorbed by the Erdtree, but the Erdtree is not giving... Oh, but it does give blessings to beings, right? Yeah, okay, so, yeah, alright. I see it. Yeah.
And indeed, when Marika is the representative of the Erdtree, it is made extremely clear that the Erdtree is the only way of governing life, and if you do not get with the program, you will be excluded to the ends of the earth.
In Marika's own words, the Erdtree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the order, or divest thyself of it, to wallow at the fringes, a powerless upstart.
I really like this quote because it illustrates the fact that the Erdtree and Marika really became to represent a dominant world power with no contenders and no flexibility. It is worth bearing in mind that the worship of Marika, the Erdtree, and the Fingers exists beyond the lands between. And this is something we learn from the Church Confessor armor set, which reads, "The churches outside the lands between, dedicated to the teachings of the two fingers, send confessors out to follow the guidance of grace." The churches outside the lands between. So be in no doubt about Marika's intention at this early stage. The Erdtree will govern all, or your existence will be that of an outcast. And this does line up nicely with what we actually see in-game. For those who do not fit within the established order do actually exist in the fringes. We have the Ancestor followers, the Misbegotten, those of the Halig Tree, the Omen, and the Albinaurics. All of these people are pushed to the fringes of the lands between, unwelcome and oppressed, struggling to preserve their own ways of life. And for a large group of the outcasts, one of the main unifying themes is the Crucible. But to answer the question as to why, the reason behind the people of the Crucible being ostracized, we must go to the heart of what the Erdtree represents in comparison to the Crucible. So with that said, let us move on to the next chapter, where we attempt to answer the question, what actually is the Erdtree? Let us backtrack slightly now and discuss the evolution of the Crucible into the Erdtree that would trigger the events leading up to what we know as the Age of the Erdtree at the conclusion of the War with the Giants. In the first chapter we have already examined that in the Godskin Noble set, that the Crucible is defined as the primordial form of the Erdtree, and so it's time to address what this actually means and how it can inform our understanding of the Erdtree's form and function. Let us examine what is meant by primordial from Oxford Languages. Their definition in regards to biology is the earliest stage of development. And so this just reinforces what we've already said a number of times, that the Crucible is the Erdtree, just at an earlier stage in its life cycle. And revisiting the Gilded Great Shield item description, we then understand that the energies found within the Crucible would coalesce and eventually form the Erdtree a new form that would replace what we knew as the Crucible. My belief is that the power of the Elden Ring, funneled into the chaotic matter of the Crucible, would grow and solidify into the Erdtree that would then rise from its primordial form to dominate the skyline of the lands between. And as already discussed in the prior chapters, as evidenced by Siluria's weapons and her armour adornments, the Crucible did actually take the form of a sort of tree prior to being named the Erdtree. And so I find this interesting because of the recent debates and ideas that have come up in the community regarding the two halves of the Erdtree. And if you aren't sure of what I mean by this, I'm referring to the fact that there's like a golden magical outer layer to the Erdtree, and then there's the inner, more traditional wooden tree, including the great tree roots that go below the catacombs. Creators like Ziostorm, Sekiro Dubi, and Quelaag have highlighted there are clear differences in the Erdtree, where it appears to be split between two different forms: a clearly more organic tree in the middle, and a bright gold encasement, which Quelaag equates to being more like the gravel stone hide of ancient dragons. We know there are lots of references to an Erdtree and a great tree, with the great tree being more associated with the roots and more natural looking part of the tree. And this is something we can learn via the root resin item description, which reads, "Resin secreted from the roots of the great tree can also be found near trees on the surface. The roots of the great tree were once linked to those of the Erdtree, or so they say, and it is for this reason catacombs are built around great tree roots." I think it's clear that the great tree facet of the Erdtree is certainly more associated with death, whereas the aspect of the Erdtree, the more ethereal part, is the source of all life.
And you can even see the different color of the Erdtree, the outer layer, as SmoughTown was describing, that the outer layer, it's got this golden whitish color, and then on the inside, like you can see, like on the inside of the bark, you can see this darker, far more believable tree bark in the inside. And that must have been the Crucible itself, And over time, as the tree evolved, it became the Erdtree. The outer bark, the newer outer bark, started to replace the Crucible bark, and it encased it like that. As you can see, like there's two different colors of it there. So yeah, I can see it now, and yeah, it's interesting. Let's continue.
As described by items like the Albinauric Bloodclot. Together they are the metaphysical form of the Elden Ring's power, though I admit the game does not make it easy to understand the relationship between the Great Tree and the Erdtree, and what this maybe has to do with the Crucible, this chaotic, traditional organic tree, growing into what we know as the Erdtree. Yet is it possible the answer is right in front of us, right in front of the Erdtree, in the form of the giant plaque that hangs over the entrance to the inner sanctum of the Erdtree? Now, what I see on this engraving is the Elden Ring at the roots. In the middle we have another tree, which could be the Great Tree or interchangeably the Crucible, and then growing out of that at the top of the plaque is the Erdtree.
But it seems like there's no continuation after that. Like the Erdtree is the final tree. After that there's nothing else. So you could say that is like a prophecy, coming into realization, where the end of the Erdtree would also become the end of Marika and her demigod children, and also the end of the Elden Ring, I would say.
Now again, I refer you to last protagonist's video on the Great Tree and Golden Order, where they identify that, contrary to what some believe, Great Tree does actually exist in the Japanese, but that it is actually synonymous with the Erdtree. To me, they are parts of the one whole, and the engraving gives us all the answers that we need, in my opinion. We spoke of how the Crucible of Life was clearly connected to the Elden Ring, and that it influenced the growth of the Erdtree from the Crucible. And to me, what we're seeing here is the Erdtree growing from that original organic tree of the Crucible that's now known as the Great Tree, but in totality, this is just one form that we know as the Erdtree. And going further with the idea that the Erdtree is both the underlying organic tree and the glowing outer case, we can look at the symbolism associated with the Erdtree. It always includes these roots. They are a part of the Erdtree. But I encourage you to go and watch Last Protagonist's video, where he aptly describes how the Great Tree and Erdtree are both separate yet synonymous. And it will hopefully help you close the book on this conundrum. But despite having grown from the Crucible, the Erdtree differs quite starkly from the rule of the Crucible, and this is something stumbled upon by the Golden Order fundamentalists, and it's ideas that I discuss in more detail in my Golden Order video, so I recommend that you go and watch that. One of the main laws of the Golden Order is regression, an idea that is well explained by Last Protagonist in his Great Tree video. But in summary, regression towards the mean is a real-world statistical analysis that posits that over time and generations, statistical outliers will pull towards the mean. The example Last Protagonist uses to describe this phenomena is when two above average height parents have a child. That child is more likely to pull towards the mean and be shorter than their parents and closer to the average height. In the world of Elden Ring, this idea can be used to explain the philosophical difference between those of the Erdtree and those of the Crucible, and why it would result in the persecution and expulsion of the latter. The Crucible is symbolic of a primeval era of wild, diverse life, but when the Erdtree emerges, life is coalesced into a single immutable symbol. As the incantation of the law of regression states, regression is the pool of meaning that all things yearn eternally to converge. To me, this is what the Erdtree represents. Life converged into a single source, and as such we begin to see why those of the Crucible would be persecuted.
But it's also just simply, what happens when one religion replaces the other. It becomes a violent affair. It becomes a hostile takeover, where one must be casted out and the other must rise, for it to claim its legitimacy and its standing in society. So, yeah.
The modern Golden Order represents life refined, converged, and more order, as the Erdtree is itself a singular source of life, rather than the uncouth, primordial, diverse life of the Crucible. And viewing the Crucible as a more primitive era is best described by the Crucible Knot Talisman, which reads as follows: a vestige of the Crucible of primordial life. Born partially of devolution, it was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced.
Yes, but who determined that? Who stated that it is an impurity of a time, of what? How should I say, like barbarism, or barbaric kind of worshipping of this religion under the Crucible? Why was that determined as something that is wrong, and the belief system and the religion around the Erdtree is correct? Who determined that? Because I think both can exist at the same time, because the Crucible and the Erdtree are one in the same. It's just the Erdtree covering over where the Crucible was. They're one in the same. So I don't understand why is it that people would want to, have one on top of the other, if I can say it like that. But then that's why I'm saying that, Queen Marika, she is basically a tool being used, and she's been giving her marching orders, if I can say that. Like, she's been told that this is now going to become the truth of the Erdtree. Everybody has to adhere to it, or you're going to be kicked out of the lands in between, And Yeah, like I said before, this is something that happens even in our real world, where there's going to be a religion that dominates the landscape, and then over time it will be replaced by another, and during that time of transition, it becomes a very violent affair. Yeah.
This advancement is the refinement of life in the form of the Erdtree, and therefore the unrefined, chaotic vestiges of the Erdtree era have no place in the modern order and are thus pushed to the fringes. The Erdtree therefore takes the place of the Crucible as the focal point of life in the lands between, as well as acting as a pylon for the Elden Ring's power. It is the central nexus of the Elden Ring's governing power, and this is why Corrin refers to the Erdtree as the source of the Golden Order.
The Erdtree, heart of the Golden Order, lies before our very eyes.
The Erdtree is a powerful manifestation of Elden Ring energy, a focal point for its power, and I think this becomes clear when you look at the evidence that suggests that the Elden Ring, Elden Beast, Marika, and the Erdtree are all intrinsically connected. Consider, for example, the Erdtree avatars, who can actually wield the same powers as the Elden Beast. The avatars are part of the Erdtree, and the fact they are manifesting the same powers as the Elden Beast is something to consider.
They even look like trees. Yeah.
But the most obvious bit of evidence that these are all connected is the fact that when the Elden Ring is shattered, so too are the Elden Beast, the Erdtree, and Marika herself. I think the design of the Elden Beast itself is also meant to allude to the connection between the two, and that the Erdtree is a manifestation of its will. For if the Elden Beast jumps above the waters, you can see it has root-like tendrils attached to its tail. And indeed, this idea of connections and links is something backed up by the incantation, the law of causality. And I feel like the more we examine the Golden Order and the Erdtree, we begin to understand why these are laws of the Golden Order. For example, the law of causality incantation reads the following: Causality is the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation. And we begin to see that the Erdtree is a nexus for the laws of regression and the laws of causality. It is a convergence nexus, as well as something that is connected to the other aspects and vessels of the Elden Ring. And we can tentatively extend this idea of connections when we look at the two fingers. Ziostorm has made some interesting revelations in his video discussing the themes of mushrooms found within Elden Ring. And while I'm not fully in on the entire game being about mushrooms, I find his analysis of the two fingers and a mycelial network very interesting and
Interesting. I think I might check that out.
compelling. In the video, Ziostorm makes the comparison of trees being connected to mushrooms through a mycelial network, and that the two fingers might be connected to the Erdtree in this manner, to convey and communicate the will of the greater will and the Erdtree. And again, this reinforces the idea that the Erdtree is some sort of cosmic nexus or pylon, and the two fingers are the connected vessels through which the Erdtree communicates.
This kind of reminds me of the network on the planet Pandora in Avatar. What did they call the tree? Awa? I think it was called Awa. Yeah, how Awa is connected to many roots across the entire planet, and how it can dispense its will to the people, when they connect with Awa using those branches, those leaves or something. I don't know what they are. But yeah, whenever the people, the Na'vi, whenever the Na'vi connect their hair strands with Awa, they're able to communicate with Awa. They're able to understand whatever Awa is demanding of the people. So I guess you could say the two fingers are kind of the same in that type of way. How they dispense the will of the greater will. Yes. Okay.
It's a really thought-provoking video, and I will link the full video below, and I recommend you go watch it. Regardless, I think this explanation of the two fingers being connected to the Erdtree directly fits, especially given that we have evidence that their deterioration is linked to that of the Erdtrees. And this is something suggested by a dialogue from Vary.
I believe that when the Elden Ring was shattered, the two fingers were corrupted, their guidance skewed.
And the description of the Lord's divine fortification. Now, the nature of the Erdtree and the way that it operates and the way its internal space operates is clearly not normal. Being connected to the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring obviously has brought some cosmic elements to this tree, quote unquote. For example, we have the Round Table Hold, which exists outside this world according to the tutorial notes in the game. Indeed, this place appears to be a copy of a real-world space, the physical Round Table Hold found in Leyndell. Now, I'm going to credit a really great spot to my friend Erdden that he made in his in-depth lore playthrough of Elden Ring, where he spotted that in some tapestries of the Erdtree in Leyndell, you can see this kind of building entwined within the upper branches of the Erdtree. And I agree with Erdden's speculation that this could well be a representation of our Round Table Hold, a manifested space created by the Erdtree, which...
How do you guys notice these things? How do you notice these things? Wow. Like, I would have passed that, you know, if I was playing the game. I would have just passed that, walked away, went to go do some other things. Like, I wouldn't be able to notice that little fine detail right there. Wow, you guys are good. You guys are really good. You've been, you know, combing and searching throughout the entire game, you know, the entire landscape and the cities and wherever else, you know, finding all of this information. And it's quite impressive, really. It's impressive.
Has an unusual relationship when it comes to time and space. This was a really great find, and I highly recommend that you check out Erdden's lore through if you enjoy an in-depth analysis of lore and environmental details. And this makes sense that the space burns at the same time that we burn the Erdtree, as it is a space that is created and generated by the power of the Erdtree, and so when the tree burns, this created space also burns. The Erdtree's cosmic nature is of course taken to the next level when we actually get to see its interior, quote unquote. And it may be that we see the interior of the Erdtree sooner than you might realise. The introductory cinematic appears to show our Tarnished waking up within an Erdtree dimension, as it looks exactly the same as the Erdtree interior that we see later, before being transported into the lands between, after Grace resurrects us from our death, suggesting the Erdtree is a confluence of time and space, a dimensional rift that we don't fully understand, but makes perfect sense given the cosmic origins of the Elden Beast and the Greater Will, which actually gave the Erdtree its form. I think this is further backed up by the way in which we enter the central cortex of the Erdtree at the end of the game. We don't just walk in, we appear to be pulled in by a golden rift, before materialising in the central space of the tree, again emphasising its cosmic origins and the way it deals with time and space. Further to this is of course the final battle between ourselves and the Elden Beast, where it seems to transport us to some kind of different dimension, where we can see multiple Erdtree-like forms in the distance. I won't pretend to fully comprehend what this means exactly, nor are we supposed to, but clearly the intention of this space is to make us understand that the world of Elden Ring is far greater than the physical world that we perceive in the lands between, and that to understand that the Erdtree acts as a nexus to the cosmic realm from which the Elden Beast and probably the Greater Will hail. In addition, it is to let you know there's a cosmic element to this story, considering players may have missed the likes of Astel and Ranni's storyline in general. It makes us feel small in the face of the Greater Will's true nature, and perhaps it is meant to imply a many worlds theory, that this is just one dimension, one parallel world, all connected by Erdtrees and all dominated by the Greater Will. Of course,
The Greater Will Yes, it might be like an interdimensional parasite, if I can say, where it just lands on any planet that harbors life, and it creates an Elden Ring. The Elden Ring thus creates a tree. This tree, further entrenches itself on the planet's surface, and those who are in the vicinity of this tree, they start worshipping it. They start having powers because of this tree, and in the end, all of the living beings on the planet, they continue to feed and to grow this parasite that's now lodged itself onto the planet. So all those other Erdtree barks or branches or structures that we saw where the Elden Beast was, in that dimension, in that place, that's all the other Erdtrees that have been planted across multiple dimensions or multiple planets across the galaxy or universe. That's what I'm thinking. So essentially, this Elden Beast or the Greater Will is some sort of parasite, some sort of interdimensional, intergalactic, universal parasite that feeds on living beings in some sort of way. Yeah. That's what I'm assuming. I could be totally, completely wrong, but yeah, that's how I see it.
Of course, this is just speculation, and really the purpose of this is to make us realise that we are at the mercy of cosmic powers far beyond our comprehension, and that the Erdtree is a nexus for that power. The final subject I'd like to touch on in this chapter is the Erdtree as we see it today, as it will become clear as we discuss Marika's reign that the Erdtree was once a more complete and perfect form. Indeed, as observed by my friend Last Protagonist in his excellent video on the Great Tree, which I've referenced about 3 times now, the Erdtree of today is different than what we see in the idealised depictions of it in paintings and in the symbolism of Leyndell forces. In these idealised depictions, such as the paintings in Round Table Hold, or again the iconography of Leyndell forces, the Erdtree seems to have been straight up and unblemished, whereas the tree now is quite tilted off its base and riddled with cracks and scars. So it seems as though the Erdtree was once a more perfect, complete and upright vision, and the Erdtree of today, while stunning to us, is far past its prime. And I think the idea of the Erdtree being way past its prime is reinforced by the Crimson Seed Talisman item description, which reads as follows: "The Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, and thus was it believed that Erdtree seeds could not exist." And earlier in the video I mentioned that the shattering of the Elden Ring was what damaged the Erdtree alongside Marika and the Elden Beast, and proof for that comes from the Golden Seed item description, which reads as follows: "When the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds flew from the Erdtree, scattering across the various lands, as if life itself knew that its end had come." And previously I spoke of how when Marika shattered the Elden Ring, she appeared to shatter herself, as well as the Elden Beast, and indeed these cracks also seem to line up with what we see on the Erdtree's bark now, seeing that it has been irreparably damaged by Marika's actions, no longer in its perfect, upright and immutable form. So while we can definitely attribute some of the damage to the Erdtree to the shattering of the Elden Ring, there is of course another massive event regarding the Elden Ring that may have contributed to the Erdtree's tilt, and that is the confinement and removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. I find this to be important because the role in which the roots of the Erdtree play in the cycle of life that the Erdtree governs. We know from various sources that death is associated with the roots of the Great Tree that were once attached to the Erdtree. Now it's key to look at the root resin where it says the roots of the Great Tree were once linked to those of the Erdtree, meaning that they are no longer linked to those of the Erdtree, and clearly being disconnected from its very roots, the things that root it to the earth, could cause it to tilt or lean. But why is this linked to the removal of the Rune of Death? Well, as we've already said, the Erdtree and the Elden Ring are intrinsically linked. When Marika shatters the Elden Ring, she damages herself and the Erdtree and the Elden Beast. Does it not therefore make sense that if a part of the Elden Ring was removed, the Rune of Death, part of the Erdtree, would be removed, to reflect the change in this new form of the Elden Ring?
You know, I am still trying to understand how is it possible that the Rune of Death would be taken out of the Elden Ring, you know? How was that possible? Because Marika is the custodian of the Elden Ring, is she not? How could she allow someone or some people just to walk in, take a piece of the Elden Ring and then walk out? How is that possible? Yeah. I mean, is it not also like imbued in her? Is it not connected to her like some sort of soul or spirit that's contained inside her body or something? So how is it possible that someone would just walk up, take the Rune of Death and just leave? Anyways. And she's a god, so we're being told. So yeah, it's just hard to believe, really.
And what is the part of the Erdtree that governs death? The roots. And so is it possible that when the Rune of Death was removed from the Elden Ring, so too were the roots removed from the Erdtree, and now we have an age of endless death, where Erdtree burials do not work anymore, and no one is absorbed up into the Erdtree. It's just stagnated, and that's why we see these half-absorbed corpses in the Erdtree catacombs.
Yuck.
This is just my speculation based on what we know between the connection of the Elden Ring and the Erdtree, but the term once connected to the roots of the Great Tree has always fascinated me, and has always led me to ponder why was the Erdtree disconnected from the roots of the Great Tree, and given they are involved with death, it makes sense to link it to the removal of the Rune of Death. So to conclude about the Erdtree, what are we really saying that it is? Well, I believe it's a metaphysical manifestation of the Elden Ring's power. It is a nexus and focal point of the power of the Elden Ring. It governs life and death, as well as being connected to Marika, the Elden Beast, and the Elden Ring, and is therefore no wonder that it becomes the focal point of greater will authority. And that being said, we now need to look at the other component part of the Age of the Erdtree, and that is the Greater Will's vassal god, Queen Marika the Eternal, the vessel for the Elden Ring.
You see, she is the vessel of the Elden Ring. She's the custodian of the Elden Ring. How is that possible that the Rune of Death was taken out? Was she sleeping? Did they knock her out with some sort of sleeping agent? Guys, I need to understand that, you know. Yeah, but anyways, let's continue.